Hello, I'm Margaret McPherson, and I am the project coordinator for the Spectrum of Exploitation project. And I'm going to take just a few minutes, myself and my colleagues, to tell you a little bit about the project and to invite you to join us in it. This is the spectrum of exploitation in its current state. This is what it looks like. The vertical column is about, what is it that impacts people's ability to make choices? And the horizontal line is about the work situation itself.
Hi, folks. My name is Annalise Trudell. I'm the Manager of Prevention, Education, and Research at ANOVA. And so ANOVA is the Gender-Based Violence Shelter and Sexual Assault Center in London, Ontario. And we are holding the grant for this work from WAGE, but really we're holding it on behalf of a collective and an advisory committee that you'll hear more from others. Now, I want to take a step back as to where this tool came from and give you a bit of a history lesson, because I think it actually informs why we're asking you to be part of this. So years ago, Sister Sue Wilson and I were the co-chairs of a local table looking at trafficking in London. And we learned a whole bunch of lessons through that work. One of the most important ones for me, at least, was around data. Now, it's not quite as dry as you think. Here's what I mean by data, is that at that given table, we were all aligned in wanting to address trafficking, but we all define trafficking differently. And that's probably true within your local communities even now. So there were organizations that defined human trafficking as a particular definition that accounted, let's say, almost all engagement in the sex trade. They would put out stats that said, this past year, we've seen 2,000 survivors of trafficking through our counseling services. Another organization would have a more finite definition of that and would say that, we've seen 25 this past year. And what we realized is that we're comparing apples and oranges. We're not actually talking in some ways about the same thing. But that wasn't just a London issue. As we started attending conferences and doing provincial and national level work, we realized actually it scales. So when you say that there are X number of survivors of trafficking in Canada, that's based on definitions on the ground level that are not all consistent. And so what's the value of that data then at the end of the day? And of course, those definitions are political. So how we define who counts, especially around sex work and sex trafficking, and where we draw those lines is a political understanding of that around choice. So what we did is that we tried to actually nuance it beyond being like, yes, it's trafficking, no, it's trafficking. And we tried to provide a spectrum to our table, where we worked on work that was previously done in particular out of BC that looked at, choice is a spectrum, how much choice we have and how much engagement and sort of abuse or exploitation we have. So as you'll see in a few minutes, that really built for us in a lot of ways the two different axes on our spectrum. So on the one axis, we're talking how much choice an individual has in their own life. And on the other axis, we're talking about what does that work context or that exchange context look like for them? How exploitative and abusive is it along a spectrum? So fast forward to now, what this is trying to do is improve our data. So yes, that is sort of on the more meta level, on a more provincial and possibly even national level over the course of a few years, looking at will this kind of nuance be able to do that? So that when you plot a client's experience here versus you plot a client's experience here, you're able to plot the nuance and the difference without getting sort of all hung up within the politics of the definition. And it will be able to give us then hopefully better data. So we're going to try to evaluate that. But on a more tangible sort of client service level, we're also trying to look at, does this give you better information when you're supporting that client? So on the one axis, we're talking about, what policy options do you have as you start to understand their scenario better? Whether you define it as trafficking or not actually gives you very little information as to what you're going to do about that, because the criminal code definition is so distinct and particular and for all kinds of reasons often not used. But there's other policy mechanisms within a spectrum of exploitation that you may have access to. So it gives you better recourse to supporting that client. It also allows you an entry point into a conversation around choice that may also help you in a clinical setting better support that individual. So better clinical care, possibly better data. And then we're also looking at whether it will also enhance our prevention and advocacy efforts. So again, if we're trying to prevent human trafficking, being able to say that we have X number of hundreds of thousands of survivors in a given year in Canada doesn't actually tell me how to necessarily work upstream to prevent that, especially when that data is all mixed and flawed. But if we are able to snapshot that, there's quite a bit of individuals who are over in here, and we know that that is a particular kind of life experience around choice that we start to see some trends in, we can work upstream to do that prevention and advocacy work. So those are the sort of 3 big calls to action in terms of why we're reaching out to you to help us in assessing whether this tool can achieve those pretty lofty outcomes.
I'm Sue Wilson, and I work at the Office for Systemic Justice with the Canadian Federation of Sisters of St. Joseph. A significant part of my focus is on decent work and living wage. So, identifying and working to change the economic patterns that undermine decent work and working toward government policy to support decent work and living wages. We developed the Spectrum of Exploitation tool to help navigate some key tensions in anti-trafficking work. I'll identify 4 that I examine in my presentation. First, there's the tension between groups that see almost all sex workers as people who have been trafficked and groups that see almost no exploitation in sex work. The tool offers solid criteria for identifying the degree and the types of exploitation that are occurring in a situation. In the matrix, the vertical line focuses on factors affecting the degree of choice a person has, and will look at both individual and systemic factors that affect choice. As we move to the lower end of this line, the focus shifts to highlighting the elements of human trafficking, the recruitment, and the means that are used to keep people in situations of exploitation. The second tension is the exploitation of workers in other sectors, especially migrant workers, and the way that this work is too often dismissed as simple labor issues with little recourse for exploited workers. Here, the tool helps to illumine the specific exploitation that's occurring. As we move along the horizontal line, you'll see examples of exploitation that occur as people try to make money or find ways to take care of their basic needs, such as food and shelter, or maybe enter into a problematic personal relationship. Along the bottom line, we point toward possible remedies for the different types of exploitation, and I'll offer real-life examples of how these situations play out in the lives of people. So the third tension, the predominant law and order approach to human trafficking in Canada is unhelpful for many people in marginalized communities who just don't feel safe dealing with police. In addition, the legal framing of human trafficking hijacks attention away from the underlying social, cultural, and economic factors, which create situations that are ripe for exploitation. These are the factors outlined in level 2 of the vertical line. Here we're looking at things like poverty, lack of education, job prospects, or social protections, as well as discrimination. They are the root causes of human trafficking, and these must be addressed if we want to create real change. That's why I also highlight the importance of using a human rights framework in this work. A human rights framework challenges us as a society to do better, to do a better job protecting labor rights in order to address exploitation in any work situation, no matter how formal or informal. And we're also challenged to do better as a global society in terms of ensuring everyone has access to the basic resources and opportunities they need for well-being. In this way, we begin to remove the barriers which create vulnerabilities to being exploited. And it's also important to note that human rights create space for people to name and to live their own unique experience and to be heard in that. And finally, the fourth tension. The Spectrum of Exploitation tool was developed as a reflection tool for agencies who accompany people who have been exploited. The tool helps to facilitate a more nuanced dialogue to help us make distinctions between human trafficking and other forms of exploitation, and to generate a deeper understanding of both the systemic and individual factors that contribute to exploitation, regardless of the type of work one is doing. In this way, as we listen to and accompany people who have been in situations of exploitation, we can have a clearer sense of the degree and the types of exploitation that are occurring, as well as possible remedies to their situation. So those are the 4 key tensions I see behind the development of the tool. If you experience these tensions in your work, this tool might be helpful for you.